I stared at the computer screen, my hands trembling as I scrolled through Elena's secret bank account. $400,000. 400,000. While I'd been pawning my father's war medals and draining my pension, believing her tears about eviction notices and unpaid bills, my daughter-in-law had been building a fortune behind all our backs. The fake utility shut-off notice she'd shown me just yesterday was still crumpled in my jacket pocket. My name is Frank Coleman, and at 67 years old, I thought I knew something about people. 34 years delivering mail teaches you to read faces, spot trouble, and understand when someone's hiding something. Turns out I was dead wrong about all of it. 2 years after my wife Martha passed, I was still learning how to live alone in our little house in suburban Ohio. The pension wasn't much, but it covered the basics. I'd wake up at 6 out of habit, make coffee for 1 instead of 2, and count the coins from my father's collection when the silence got too heavy. Those coins were my safety net. Silver dollars from the 1920s, Mercury dimes, even a few Indian head pennies that had been in the family since before I was born. That's when Elena started visiting. She'd married my son David 3 years earlier. This pretty 29-year-old with dark hair and eyes that could tear up on command. Well, I didn't know about the command part back then. David had been out of work for months after the construction company folded, and Elena claimed she was trying to keep their online boutique afloat. She'd show up at my door twice a month like clockwork, always with the same routine. First came the documents, eviction notices with official letterheads, medical bills with David's name, business loan papers with payment deadlines circled in red ink. Then came the tears. Not the dramatic sobbing you see in movies, but the quiet, desperate kind that made your chest ache. The kind that reminded me of Martha crying over her cancer diagnosis. "I don't know what else to do, Frank," she'd whisper, dabbing her eyes with tissues I'd learned to keep ready. David's been trying so hard to find work, but with his back injury, construction jobs are impossible. The boutique is our only hope, but we're always 1 month behind. Makes sense, right? Young couple struggling in a tough economy. Son too proud to ask his father directly for help. Devoted wife trying to hold everything together. I started small, a few hundred here and there from my checking account. But Elena's crises had a way of escalating. The boutique needed inventory for the holiday season. David needed physical therapy they couldn't afford. Their car broke down, and without it, Elena couldn't make deliveries to customers. Each story was perfectly reasonable. Each request came with documentation. Each time, Elena promised it was temporary, just until David found steady work, just until the business turned profitable, just until they got back on their feet. The weird part is how natural it felt. After Martha died, I'd been desperate for purpose. Taking care of David's family gave me something to wake up for. It felt like honoring Martha's memory, being the kind of father and grandfather she'd want me to be. Then there were the bigger asks. Elena needed a substantial loan for business equipment, some kind of packaging machinery that would save them money in the long run. The paperwork looked official enough, complete with vendor quotes and projected savings calculations. That's when I sold my first batch of coins. 12 silver dollars that my father had collected during the Depression. They brought $800 at the coin shop, and Elena hugged me so tight I could smell her expensive shampoo. But here's what started bothering me. Elena drove a car newer than mine. She wore jewelry I'd never seen before. Definitely not Martha's pieces, though she claimed they were family heirlooms. When I mentioned these things, she always had explanations ready. The car was leased through the business for tax purposes. The jewelry came from David's grandmother, pieces I'd somehow forgotten. David seemed oblivious to most of these financial disasters Elena described. Whenever I tried to bring them up, he'd look confused or change the subject. I figured he was embarrassed about needing help. What I discovered next would change everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and the woman my son had married. The accidental discovery happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Elena had shown up earlier than usual. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, clutching what looked like foreclosure papers. Real official stuff with county seals and everything. She was sobbing about how they had 30 days to save their house, how David didn't even know yet, because she was trying to handle it herself. "I can't bear to see him lose everything, Frank," she whispered, her voice breaking in all the right places. "After your Martha always talked about how important it is to have a home, a place where family belongs." That hit me right in the gut. Martha had said those exact words. Elena excused herself to use the bathroom, leaving her phone face up on my kitchen table. I wasn't trying to snoop. Hell, I barely knew how to work my own flip phone back then. But the screen lit up with a notification that made my coffee go cold in my mouth. Business account deposit, 15,147 jazzers. $15,000 in one deposit. My first thought was relief. Maybe Elena's luck had finally turned. Maybe some big customer had paid their bill, or the business had gotten that loan she'd been chasing. When she came back from the bathroom, I was ready to congratulate her, but she grabbed the phone without a word about any good news, just kept crying about the foreclosure, about how desperate they were, about how she didn't know where else to turn. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong, like when you know you've forgotten something important, but can't remember what. $15,000 doesn't just appear in someone's account while they're begging for rent money, does it? Martha had taught me basic computer skills before she got sick. Email, simple web searches, online banking. She said the world was going digital, and I needed to keep up. Thank God for that woman's foresight. I started with Elena's business website. She'd mentioned the name dozens of times, Bella's Boutique Online. But when I searched for it, I found something completely different than what she'd described. This wasn't some struggling little shop with inventory problems. The website was professional, polished, loaded with thousands of products. Customer reviews went on for pages, 5 stars everywhere, comments about fast shipping, great customer service, amazing selection. One review said they'd been ordering from Bella's for 2 years and never had a single problem. 2 years. That's exactly when Elena started coming to me for help with her failing business. But here's where it gets really interesting. I kept digging, following links, checking business registration records that were surprisingly easy to find online. Elena wasn't just running one successful business. She had 3 different company names, all registered to her address, all selling different types of products online, all with stellar reviews and obvious signs of serious money flowing through them. The more I discovered, the sicker I felt. Property records showed Elena had been browsing real estate listings in North Carolina. Not just any houses either. These were expensive places, $500,000 homes with swimming pools and 3-car garages, way beyond what someone with a struggling business could afford. And she'd been doing all of this alone. David's name wasn't on any of the business registrations, not on the property searches, not anywhere. That's when the real scope of Elena's betrayal hit me like a freight train. I went back through my records, adding up every check I'd written, every coin I'd sold, every family heirloom I'd pawned. $65,000 over 2 years, $65,000 while Elena was pulling in what looked like serious money from multiple thriving businesses. The Purple Heart I'd pawned for $800, gone forever, bought by some collector who had no idea it represented my father's sacrifice in World War II. Martha's wedding ring, which I'd sold during Elena's medical emergency last fall, probably sitting in some stranger's jewelry box. But the psychological manipulation was even worse than the money. Elena had studied me like a textbook. She knew exactly which buttons to push, which memories to invoke, which fears to exploit. My loneliness after Martha's death, my desperate need to feel useful, my love for David and desire to protect his future. She'd even figured out how to use Martha's memory as a weapon. Those little comments about what Martha would have wanted, how Martha had talked about the importance of family helping family, how Martha would be proud to see Frank taking care of his son's wife. Then there was the separate narrative she'd created for David. I called my son that week, casually bringing up some of Elena's recent financial requests. David had no clue what I was talking about. Dad, Elena told me you've been insisting on helping us out, even though we keep saying we're fine, David said. She said you get upset when we try to refuse your money. I thought it was your way of dealing with grief, staying connected to family. Elena had convinced David that I was forcing money on them out of generosity, while simultaneously convincing me that they were desperate and grateful for my help. She'd created two completely different realities, keeping father and son in separate bubbles of deception. The woman was a master manipulator. She'd turned my love for my son into a weapon against both of us. What really burned me up was discovering her exit strategy. Elena wasn't planning to keep this charade going forever. Those North Carolina houses she'd been researching. She was planning to present the move to David as a surprise business opportunity. A fresh start in a new state with money she claimed came from her finally successful ventures. David would have been thrilled. His wife's business taking off, a beautiful new house, a chance to leave behind his struggles in Ohio. He'd never have known the house was bought with his father's sacrifices, his grandfather's war medals, his grandmother's jewelry. Elena would have gotten everything she wanted: a successful business, a wealthy lifestyle, and a husband who adored her for making it all possible. Meanwhile, I'd have been left behind in Ohio, financially ruined and probably too ashamed to tell anyone how completely I'd been fooled. But she made one crucial mistake. She got greedy and careless. That phone notification was like catching a glimpse behind the curtain of a magic show. Once you see how the trick works, you can't unsee it. Now I face the hardest decision of my life. How do you tell your son that the woman he loves has been systematically robbing and manipulating his family? How do you destroy someone's marriage even when you know it's built on lies? I had one chance to handle this right, one opportunity to expose Elena's deception without completely destroying my relationship with David. The plan I came up with would either bring justice or backfire spectacularly. I decided to handle this the way Martha would have wanted. Direct but fair. Give Elena one chance to come clean before I burned her whole world down. The family dinner was my idea. Nothing fancy, just Sunday pot roast at my kitchen table, like we used to do when Martha was alive. David showed up first, looking tired but happy to see me. Elena arrived 20 minutes later, all smiles and apologies about running late. From a client meeting. That should have been my first clue. She was still playing games. What kind of boutique owner takes client meetings on Sunday evening? We made small talk over dinner. David talked about a construction job he might get. Elena nodded along, occasionally touching his hand in that supportive wife way. I watched her performance, noticing details I'd missed before. How she steered conversations away from specifics about her work. How she changed the subject whenever David mentioned their finances. The woman was smooth. I'll give her that. After we finished eating, I poured coffee and casually brought up Elena's business. How's the boutique doing these days? You seem pretty worried about those supplier payments last week. Elena's face shifted into that familiar mask of concern. Oh, Frank, it's still touch and go. You know how seasonal retail can be. We're hoping things pick up before summer, but with the rent increase and everything. She trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. David looked confused. Rent increase? I thought our landlord said rates were staying the same this year. Quick as lightning, Elena recovered. The business space, honey. Not our apartment. I told you about that last month. But I caught something in David's expression. A flicker of doubt. Like maybe he was starting to notice the inconsistencies too. That's when I pulled out the printouts. I'd organized everything neatly in a manila folder. Screenshots of Elena's real business websites showing thousands of positive reviews, property records of those North Carolina houses she'd been researching, bank deposit notifications I'd managed to track down through business registration records, the whole paper trail of her deception laid out like evidence in a courtroom. "Elena," I said quietly, sliding the folder across the table, "I think we need to talk about what's really going on here." The transformation was instant and terrifying. The tears stopped like someone had flipped a switch. Her shoulders straightened. The vulnerable, desperate woman who'd been sitting at my table vanished completely, replaced by someone I'd never seen before. "You went digging into my private business." Her voice was cold, controlled. No more trembling or whispered pleas. David grabbed the folder, flipping through pages with growing horror. "Elena, what is this? These houses cost $500,000. And what's this about multiple businesses?" For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Elena laughed, actually laughed, like the whole situation was amusing rather than devastating. "You could afford it, Frank. Look at this house, this neighborhood. You've been sitting on equity and pension money while we're trying to build something real." She gestured around my modest kitchen like it was some kind of mansion. "I was planning to pay you back eventually, with interest." The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, she was trying to make herself the victim. "Pay him back?" David's voice cracked. "Elena? He sold Grandpa's war medals. He pawned Grandma's jewelry. He's been eating canned soup for dinner because he gave us his grocery money." That's when Elena's mask slipped completely. That was his choice. Nobody forced him to play the generous grandfather. He wanted to feel needed, so I let him feel needed. Everybody wins. David stared at his wife like she was a stranger, which I realized she basically was. "You've been planning to move us to North Carolina without telling me where the money came from." Elena shrugged. "I was going to surprise you." The room felt like a bomb had gone off. David kept reading through my evidence, his face getting paler with each page. Elena sat back in her chair, arms crossed, no longer bothering to pretend. What happened next would determine whether my family could ever heal from this betrayal. David closed the folder and looked at Elena like she was a complete stranger. "You manipulated my father for 2 years. You made him sell his dad's Purple Heart while you were banking $15,000 at a time." Elena rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, David. Your father's a grown man who made his own choices." "Choices based on lies you fed him." She stood up, grabbing her purse from the counter. "Fine. You want the truth? Your father was lonely and desperate to feel important. I gave him purpose. He got to play the hero, and I got funding for my businesses. Win-win." The casual cruelty in her voice made my stomach turn. This woman had dissected my grief like a scientist studying bacteria. "You're sick," David whispered. "I'm practical." Elena headed for the door. "When you get tired of living paycheck to paycheck in this pathetic little town, you know where to find me. I'll be in North Carolina, in a house with a pool." The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. David and I sat in silence for what felt like hours. Finally, he spoke. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I had no idea about any of this. How could you? She's a professional." He ran his hands through his hair. "The war medals, Dad. Grandpa's Purple Heart. Gone. Sold to some collector in Cleveland for $800. David started crying then. Real tears, not the manufactured ones Elena had perfected. "I'll find it. I'll buy it back somehow." "Son, That medal's probably hanging in someone's man cave by now. But David was already pulling out his phone, searching for the pawn shop's website. Maybe they kept records. Maybe the collector would sell it back. 3 weeks later, David surprised me with a small velvet box. Inside was my father's Purple Heart, along with a receipt showing David had paid $2,000 to get it back from a collector in Columbus. I sold my motorcycle, he said simply. Elena filed for divorce 2 months later, citing irreconcilable differences. She kept the businesses, the money, and apparently found that house in North Haifa. Carolina, David kept his dignity and started rebuilding his relationship with reality. Me? I learned that trust is like Martha's good china. Once it's broken, you can glue the pieces back together, but you'll always see the cracks. The difference is knowing which people are worth the careful handling, and which ones you should keep away from the good stuff entirely. Sometimes the most expensive education comes disguised as family.